2013, he was elected under KANU Party. In 2017, Kenya National Congress. And then in 2022, he was elected under UDA Party. That shows you how much they loved him and they wanted him as a leader, because they elected him 3 different times under 3 different parties. And 2 of those parties, KANU and Kenya National Congress at the time, were not like Chama Tawala or Chama that had the most popular, or you could call it that, but they still elected him. And then 2022 he was elected under UDA, and he's been remembered for quite a lot of things: his fight, his zeal, his belief in the people and how he tried to better their lives. There even Kalenjin musicians who talked about how he really fought for them. He even has a whole music awards that he started. And then he died with people who loved him, because when you listen to the family and friends of the other 4 who died with him, they talk about how much he meant to them, how much he meant to their sons, how much he meant to their friends, how much he meant to their siblings. And it was a sad day today, Yvonne, if you had watched the story that was done by Leto, how the emotions that were in the faces and in the speech of the people in Emirua Dikir. So it was sad day, sad week. And tomorrow, of course, finally, ni mazishi, they will be buried. And then, you know, they can just be remembered, wakumbukwe kwa uzuri, I think. And of course, the speeches that have been made about Ngeno, and also the people who died with him, the family of the school teacher, Robert Kipkoech Keter, talking about how he had just gotten his letter, his TSC letter, and they were expecting him to go pick it, start his life. The family of Nicholas Koskei, he's a journalist like us, and what they said about it. The family of Amos Kimwetich Rotich, Wycliffe Kiprotich Rono, and Colonel George Were, whose family talked about how he was retiring at the end of this year. He had over 4,000 hours of flight. And it's really been a sad week, Yvonne. And I think it's, you can just remember them kwa uzuri and just pray that Mwenyezi Mungu alaze pema palipo na wema.
Yeah. And we'll listen to the tributes that were given by family members of all of them in just a moment. Jay, your thoughts and reflections on what happened?
Thank you. First of all, condolences to the families of the 6 persons who died in this accident. And listening to people speak about them, you realize that each one of them impacted the community in their own way. And makes me just emphasize one thing that we have come accustomed to of late, that give people their flowers while they're still here. Because some of us never knew these gentlemen, apart from the MP and the pilot. But you realize the impact that people like Robert, people like Nick, that I also understood went to the same university like I did, had within the spaces that they thrived in. And you say, give them their flowers while they're still here, because you never know the hour nor the time. But let me also add that a number of our colleagues I also spoke to really felt this, because the pilot, George Were, have flown a number of them to various assignments across the country. And they are reliving the tales of how a gentleman he was, how kind he was and patient with them during these assignments, and he would do anything for them to get these good pictures that they finally bring to our audiences on air, and just saying that he was one of the best that they've flown. So it is very important that we continue to pray for these families. For the MP Joanna Ngeno, I think the region has lost. His community has lost, and Kenya has lost. The artists that he supported. We all know that Kenyan artists are not very well taken care of. And for you to find an individual that goes out of his way to organize concerts, have recognitions for them, and just appreciate the role that they play in the society was really selfless of him to do that. So we pray that these families, their friends and relatives may find peace as a result of this terrible accident that happened on Saturday evening.
Yeah, Sam?
Right, and it's been a heavy week that all of us have witnessed, especially coming from the constituents of Murwadi Kir, and of course the fellow leaders that Johanna Ngeno served with, and the families of the 5 gentlemen who died in that air crash. And I think as we were even processing these developments, I remember watching a conversation I held with Johanna Ngeno. It was in May 2025. At the time, we were talking about the progress that had been made in as far as implementation of the affordable housing program, and that had come just a few days after the unveiling of the 1,080 units in Mukuru. And we had an elaborate conversation with different professionals and stakeholders on it. And I remember him very passionately explaining what he knew from the position of a member of parliament, but also as a person that chaired the Committee on Housing. And you could tell, because the housing program has not been an easy ride for the current administration, and especially also looking at the members of parliament that have been at the forefront of championing for this. But he took it in stride, and from his explanations, you could see someone who was actually passionate about what he was doing, which is an unusual thing to find in political leaders. But now for him, and you must have seen the situation that the Principal Secretary for Housing was in, that is Charles Hinga. You can tell the sort of relationship they had, a working relationship, which I think for the country and the constituents of Murwadi Kir, this is something they'll remember, that not just about serving the people of Murwadi Kir for the time that he had since 2013, but even the people of Kenya for what he was able to do, which is quite an honor for him to serve in such a capacity, but more importantly, what exactly he was able to do in that committee. So I think for us is just to mourn with the families of the 5 very young and energetic men. I think the oldest is about, apart from the pilot and Mheshimiwa Ngeno, the oldest person there is about 37 or thereabouts. So very young people that are getting on with life, setting up their families. Right. It's a difficult moment, and we can only just pray that their families can find comfort to deal with this loss.
Indeed. I'd like us to listen now to the tributes that were paid by the family members at a service earlier this week here in Nairobi.
The laughter, the dreams, the simplicity of believing we had endless time. But even death cannot take what we built. It cannot erase the love, the memories, the family we created. You'll always be my Joha.
To our children, your father loved you more than words could ever express. He was proud of each one of you and always spoke about your future with hope and excitement.
Nick was just a young and ambitious person, and he was very industrious in his work that he did. So I think it is barely 1 year since he worked for Mheshimiwa, because he finished the internship with the county government of Bomet. And that is from there when he got the work with Mheshimiwa to be his camera person.
It is so difficult to accept that you are no longer here with us. You are the light of my family, the strength of our family.
He is the one who survived for about 30 minutes, but when he was interrogated, he only asked a question. He said, "Where is Mheshimiwa?"
He did his work with the zeal and the determination of a professional pilot.
Indeed, like we said, our condolences to the families as they prepare to rest or lay to rest their kin tomorrow, is it?
Yes, tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
For 5 of them. Yeah,
send-off journeys begin. And while all of that was happening, there was another service today, of course, but something else was taking place in the National Assembly, as has become the norm with issues or projects or initiatives or bills or proposals that are fronted by the government. We have, or on the verge of, the National Infrastructure Fund bill becoming law. And quite a debate it has been. There's been public participation exercises where they've listened to the views of many Kenyans. Sam, where are we this evening? This bill is ready to become law.
Yes, the developments this afternoon were quite significant because the Committee of the Whole House, which is one of the stages when it comes to lawmaking, had a moment to process several of the amendments that have been proposed, of course, from different quarters, including those that are from the Finance and Planning Committee, represented by the chairperson, Kuria Kimani. So a very significant afternoon. You recall that the days of Tuesday and Wednesday, these are the days that the House was going through the debate stage in the second reading, where members of Parliament were able to express themselves. Of course, many in support of the bill as it had been proposed. Some of them saying that this is the surest way to ensuring that we're able to now straighten how we identify, how we finance, and how we execute projects, infrastructure projects in the country. So we'll shortly be listening to some of the voices of what members of Parliament were saying. But you recall that there were critical issues that have been raised by members of Parliament. We'll be listening to some of those in 2.3 about some of the cabinet, some of the members of Parliament saying that it would appear that the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury had so much power in as far as implementation of the fund itself. Let's listen to Mheshimiwa Kagusha.
If it is going to prioritize projects, if it is going to structure infrastructure financing, if this board indeed is going to do all these things, why is the Cabinet Secretary sitting at the center of every control lever?
All right, so that's the Member of Parliament for Mokureni raising questions about the involvement of the Cabinet Secretary in the board of the Infrastructure Fund. Let's listen to the Kathiani Member of Parliament, Robert Mboyo, on what he said about implementation of the fund itself.
There is nowhere in this bill that shows any plan that will make sure that the money being distributed through this fund will be able to reach everybody fairly. So, Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely no benefit for this fund. And I think it's just a way by which we want to borrow more money and have money that we can be able to use, especially going into the next election, because I'm certain that is the purpose for which this bill is being pushed.
Right, so suspicion right there. Of course, Robert Mbui is the Member of Parliament for Kathiani and also a Deputy Minority Leader. He comes from the Wiper Party. Today we saw a press conference by the United Opposition expressing similar sentiments. The Member of Parliament for Kajiado North had a few things to say in as far as the involvement of the executive that he felt Parliament was not being involved.
For the NGCDF fund, we even approved the constituency committee. We approved the board, the committee. This particular law, the executive appoints, the executive gazettes. There is no mention of the National Assembly.
So again, a question raised about why was Parliament being left out. Let's listen to another Member of Parliament, Wilberforce Oundo, who spoke about what was going to be the role of Parliament. We'll hear it shortly from now. But when you listen to some of those developments, they then inform, or partly inform, what we saw today. Several amendments lined up by the Finance and Planning Committee, one of them being that because it appeared that the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury was very much empowered in influencing the running of the fund, now there's the establishment of a National Governing Council that is supposed to have some, is it 7 or 8 members, some of whom you have the Cabinet Secretary National Treasury as a member, you have the Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya as a member, the Attorney General is a member, and then you have 4 other persons that are supposed to be appointed into that council. So that council is appointed by the president. They say it's supposed to be competitive picking, especially for those outside the 3 who come from the executive or different offices. And then the governing council is the one that is going to hire the board of directors. So this board of directors, as of yesterday, or based on the original bill, was requiring that there would be independent directors recruited competitively based on, hear this, the Government-Owned Enterprises Act 2025. So there was a bit of confusion there, because then how do you borrow an act to guide how you're going to recruit directors of a board while you have not acknowledged this infrastructure fund in itself as a government-owned enterprise? Yeah. So that has been scrapped, and instead you have that the National Infrastructure Governing Council is the one that is going to hire the board of the National Infrastructure Fund. It's supposed to have 4 independent directors, and then there'll be 3 public officers who will be appointed based on their position or expertise. So basically, those are government officials that will be appointed into that slot. And ideally, you'll find that there will be a bit of influence from the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary getting to appoint those. But then, beyond that now, you find the Cabinet Secretary has exited from the board.
Yeah.
But now sitting in the Governing Council.
Yeah.
While at that, the Governing Council is supposed to meet at least 2 times a year, but they can call for a meeting any other time that they find the need, as long as there's a notice of about 5 days. So you find the introduction of the President in appointing the Governing Council, of course, heavy in those offices that I just mentioned. Those officers who are appointed by the President will now hire the directors who are supposed to be competitively hired by the Governing Council. Let's listen to Mheshimiwa Wilberforce Oundo, because here we have him now explaining some of his concerns about the bill as it was initially. Okay, we don't have that, but anyway, so for now, Yvonne, those are some of the changes that have come in.
Yeah.
There will be more that we talk about, especially when it comes to the concerns on borrowing, which have been moving.
Which is where I want to go to, because this was a fundamental selling point of the National Infrastructure Fund, which was the government saying, you know, we're stretched debt-wise. And now when we want to fund our big infrastructure projects, that we're not going to get into debt. And in fact, this was the premise of sending, or rather selling, you know, Kenya Pipeline shares, and with Safaricom as well, which was that all of this money would be the seed fund for this infrastructure fund, that from now on, we would, you know, in the most simple of terms, we will be selling what we own, putting it together to now fund infrastructure. And then there was a point at which initially something about borrowing was then sneaked into this bill, which then started to give people quite some jitters, because that's not the original premise of this. And are we getting into more debt? And maybe we can listen to MP Oundo, who did raise questions about, you know, the initial purpose and the premise of this fund.
Commercially viable infrastructure projects. That was what was sold. And it was sold so eloquently, so passionately.
Yeah, and he said the same thing, and maybe we can just get ready to listen to MP Ndindi Nyoro of Kiharu, who also, you know, had raised some concerns, as he has been, on this issue, particularly of borrowing. Let's listen to him now.
We are now opening another debt book, which you are calling Infrastructure Fund, Honorable Speaker. The right and correct title of this bill is actually National Illegal Borrowing Fund.
Yeah, of course, you know, some comments and statements being made there on the floor of the House. You know, Jay, your thoughts as to, you know, how we've progressed with this one, and we'll be checking the amendments in a moment to just see where we are with respect to this issue of allowing this entity to be able to borrow for funding.
And that is where the problem begins, because if you look at national infrastructure funds across the world, their roles are very, very simple. And that is what was initially sold to Kenyans. And that is why there was initial support for it. But then again, Treasury, being very clever, decided to sneak things in that then made it not a national infrastructure fund, but something else. And that is why we had all these questions around it. If you listen to the presentations that were made by the Auditor General, Nancy Gathungu, ISPAC, PwC, IPF, and all these think tanks, they raised doubts that now in its form as it was being presented, then you started to ask the question, is it legal first? And two, is it fiscally fit for us as a country? And these are the basic things that Treasury ought to have explained in the initial phases. But then again, when they become sneaky and put in now clauses that now transforms it into something like Ndindi Nyoro calls it, then you raise the red flag. But I want to say that this idea is very good. However, Where it has worked, there are basic things that has made it work. And the first thing is that it is operated a corporate-style entity, not as a department of government that the National Treasury wanted to make it. Such that issues around professionalism, issues around corporate governance and structures are adhered to, because that is the only thing that buys Kenyans trust into this fund. I'm glad that the National Assembly, for the first time in many instances today, did what we did not expect them to do. Some of these changes that they made, fortunately, now gives it the legs that it needs to work. However, the problem comes in the implementation. Like Sam has said, when you create a governing council, but then again you still have a top-heavy government seats, then even the independent directors may not do much. But I hope, based on the amendments that have been made, that Parliament will be expecting to approve all the investments programs and policies.
Right, yes.
Then we'll give it that oversight that this fund needed.
Yeah, and maybe that's what will cure, many of the scandals. And by the way, in many other parts of the world, it has had some success, some great success, but it has also been
backfired. Yes,
I think we've said that around here. There's a documentary out there of a young man called Jolo. Ask them what they did with the Malaysia 1MDB fund, how big artists were being paid millions of dollars to come and, perform at birthday parties. So we've seen how this can be misused. And I think those are the questions that Kenyans are asking because they have seen it, they have understood it, they have seen how good it can be in the countries that it has actually funded some great projects, and they've also seen how this can be a scandal, by the way, that has brought down administrations and sent former presidents to jail.
On the same note, Yvonne, you're talking about what Kenyans have seen. I'm looking at what we've put on screen there. Who knows what? So what do Kenyans really know? Or because when you look at the push and pull, there are those who are speaking for it, and mostly it's government. And then you have, like you were listening to Parliament, those who are raising questions or poking holes are probably those who would say are in the opposition. So kila moja anavuta upande wake. So you ask yourself, okay, so who is really speaking for me? Who is really speaking for the Kenyan who's watching this whole debate about 5 trillion shillings and looking at our history with money in this country, our history with funds, our history with mega projects, and how there's always this question about transparency. There's this question about what are we not being told. There's this question about who is involved. And then we were asking, well, is there a hidden public debt somewhere? Are we going to have taxpayers being responsible for something going forward? Is this just another political mega project that's being brought to our shores again? So you ask yourself all these questions, because I was trying to remember during the public participation that was done for this bill, there were a lot of questions that were raised, and some of the questions people raised was, one, some of our development challenges are not really due to lack of funding. It's due to lack of transparency. It's because of corruption. It's because of leadership. It's because of what has happened after. Maybe such projects have been, maybe not this big projects have been mooted. And then they're talking about governance and prioritization of projects, and they are worried that this fund can raise constitutional and fiscal risks if they're not well managed. They talk about how there should be a lot of independence in terms of who manages what. Because history has shown us again that if it comes to money, there'll always be issues. Then now the whole issue about elections coming up, is this whole thing political? And what does this mean going forward? So this project has to have a lot of transparency. There should be a lot of communication to people about where we are and what we are doing. There should be a lot of sessions where questions are answered. And there should be a lot of people being told, we are going here, instead of something being done already, alafu inakuja kujulikana baadaye. So transparency is very important.
And you know the reason it is, this infrastructure fund is worth 5 trillion. For context, our budget, our current one is what, 4.239 trillion shillings. And this is why Kenyans should, pay attention to what has been passed. It is big money. It is a lot of money. And it is not just a lot of money, we are selling our national assets to fund this. So if in your home you're going to say, we're going to sell this car so that it can fund education, then you've got to be very clear that when you sell that car, that all the proceeds of that go towards paying education, the children's education and their school fees. And I think that is the crux of the matter here. And it would be who makes sure, right, that this car has been sold for 500,000 shillings, the school fees is X amount, this is what we need to do, and we pay for that, and that's an investment in our families and our children's future. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I know sometimes, you know, the numbers are big and they're mind-boggling, and it's tempted to think, okay, you know, what happens? And that is why the issue, I think, of having parliamentary oversight is very important. And those are some of the issues that were raised in the House. And I'm glad that, you know, some of the amendments that were put in took note of that. We can listen to Makali Mulu, who, you know, talked about, you know, raised his concerns over the role of the House in oversighting this fund.
Once we pass this fund to become an act of parliament, honorable members, there will be minimal oversight by this House. Matters in terms of how do you apply the resources, and in terms of how have the resources been utilized, so that you can confirm that the resources were used for public interest.
Majority Leader in the House then sought to allay those fears.
What does the Auditor General do with these reports? He brings those reports to the National Assembly. Therefore, your effective role of oversight is guaranteed under the Constitution.
Yeah, and I just want us to listen to him one more time, making a case for this fund.
That he said, Honourable Speaker, that we cannot continue funding such essential and capital-heavy infrastructure from our own budget, because it will necessitate that we continue either to borrow or to overburden taxpayers with additional taxation. And he said we cannot continue funding essential infrastructure through unsustainable borrowing or overburdening taxpayers with additional taxes. But neither can we afford to postpone these imperatives without risking our future.
And as he said, we cannot continue funding development through borrowing. And yet that clause was in it. Yep. But now with the amendments, is it? In terms of what was passed today?
In fact, the Leader of Majority had been quoting the President, because when he appeared in November for the State of the Nation address, that's what he was explaining. And the Leader of Majority, again, responded to the members of Parliament that they still have the power to oversight because the Auditor General's report will come in there. And you're wondering why this was going on, knowing too well there's something that was cooking. He was referring them to the committee report, the Finance and Planning Committee on public participation on this particular bill. But of course, the members were saying that you debate the bill as it is. You do not debate the report. You deal with the bill, then when the amendments are moved by the departmental committee, then you can have a say about them. But now today, when you look at, there was an amendment from the committee saying that the monies of the fund, so they decided to amend that particular clause that was providing for, let me just read what it was saying. It was providing for part of the sources of the money could be money lent to the board, also the fund itself. But now the proposed amendment was to delete that clause and instead to say that the monies of the fund shall include proceeds of privatization under the Privatization Act, or B, proceeds from the sale of shares in a government-linked corporation under Section 87 of the PFM Act. So this is where Safaricom resources or the proceeds of Safaricom sale would come in. And then proceeds from investments undertaken by the fund. So if the fund goes ahead and invests in a certain project and is taking in proceeds, let's assume that it's investing in a toll road and it's collecting some revenue. So those are resources that will form part of the source of the fund for this institution. So for now, the borrowing has been scrapped. stopped. So we'll wait to see how then the government will go ahead to make sure that they're able to collect up to 5 trillion shillings. Of course, they are saying that once they receive resources, it doesn't mean that if, say, 106 billion shillings is coming in from the Kenya Pipeline Company sale, it doesn't mean that all the money will now go to investing, say, to the expansion of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. There's something the leader of majority was explaining yesterday, saying that you may decide to take about 50 billion shillings to JKIA. You bring in an investor who also comes in, and they are now, by them, the investors are able now to borrow. Not the fund borrowing, but them borrowing to build that infrastructure. So it will be interesting to see how that goes. But there's something else I wanted us to focus on, which is, yes, sometimes we assume that everyone knows what you're talking about. When the president pronounced his ambition to take the country to the first world status, you may have assumed that even the members of parliament understood him, even those that come from his side of politics. Let's listen to some of the leaders, including Naomi Wako, who is one of the leaders within the Kenya Kwanza. I think he is the deputy minority whip of the national, deputy majority whip of the National Assembly. Naomi Wako, woman rep for Marsabit.
I come from Marsabit, and today what we want is to have water. And all our problems, in fact, our main problem in Marsabit is water. And unless we get these funds, then we will not be able to get enough water to do agriculture, because even the other areas of this country can no longer depend on the rainwater.
So that is the woman representative for Marsabit talking about the gap of water in Marsabit that needs to be resolved, and she was happy that this fund is coming to respond to that. Let's listen to Farah Maalim, who is the member of parliament for Dadaab.
Dr. Makali, the most viable areas in this country today are the arid and semi-arid areas. Commercially, yes. Land and minerals. This is not the days of just coffee and tea. For your information, things have changed.
All right. But listen, the argument here is commercially viable projects. Listen to Mheshimiwa Ngogoyo of Kajiado North.
Because when you talk of commercial viability, it is not a must that all constituencies have commercial viability. And potential is not only in commercial viability. Mr. Speaker, this is another introduction of the sessional paper that members talk about here that say they are high potential areas. It's another way of saying that there are areas that have more potential than other areas, and therefore you're setting up a fund to fund those areas.
And then the economist, member of parliament for Kitui Central, Dr. Makali Mulu.
It says the fund shall undertake feasibility studies on investment projects to determine the commercial viability of the projects.
Order.
The word commercial is important.
Then there's another member of parliament who has an opinion on their reading.
The bill talks about funding national commercially viable projects. That's what it talks about. In highway, railway networks, airports, seaports, because the intention of this fund, when you invest in commercially viable projects, the proceedings, the revenues from those projects are supposed to come back to the fund to fund other projects. That's the essence of this bill.
So there had been concerns, many saying that because of the challenges of collecting revenue, borrowing, you don't have enough within budget to put up various programs or projects in the country. Some members of parliament were feeling this is the answer to the constituency needs. Kimani Ichung'wah told them this.
I have heard, Honorable Speaker, during the debate, many people assuming that this fund will come and develop my 2 kilometers of roads. Far from it. It will go into those projects that are commercially viable, projects that can repay themselves. Then those that cannot repay themselves, like the roads Honorable Kagushi was speaking about in Mukurweini, the roads in Kikuyu, the roads in Kajiado North or Kajiado West or anywhere, any other part of the country, those now we budget for them in our budgets.
So clearly there's There are varying understanding of what the bill was proposing, a varying appreciation of what the facts are. But I think the amendment that has been carried by the House to define what national infrastructure means, that it's national highways, it is railway networks, it is airports, it is seaports, it is electricity generation, transmission and distribution infrastructure, water reservoirs, and irrigation and agribusiness infrastructure. That is what this fund is meant to implement. So for anyone who would have thought that this is the final answer to the Kasmore Road that runs from the cattle dip to the farm, this is not it.
I think, let me just add that the National Treasury has a lot of work in communicating this. Once it becomes law, because if members of parliament who are supposed to be the cornerstone of oversight and legislation, then this is revealed, then tells you that the constituents that they serve may not have ideas. So it is important that the National Treasury, going forward, does strategic communications to just help Kenyans understand, because once it becomes law, we are stuck with it. We need to appreciate its role and impact in our economy.
Yeah, and you were talking about having clarity of the projects that this fund is supposed to, be geared towards. That's important, right?
Yeah, very, very important, because again, we're in the season of politics, and all manner of context will be assigned to this fund. So it is important that people understand what exactly it does and how it is managed.
Yeah, and how the Mwananchi would also be able to ask their MPs, when you go to Parliament, ask them about this. And so that clarity needs to start as well at the National Assembly. Before then the people themselves can understand it. And granted, lawmaking is difficult, it's challenging, particularly when it's to do with big projects like this and money. And, as human beings, we all think, okay, there's a 5 trillion shilling fund that's here. We're going to be, we're selling assets. There's money that's coming in here. Hey, we have this project here that's unfinished. This is something that we need done. I mean, granted, everybody would be thinking, like you were saying, Sam, this could be the solution to some of our problems. So a lot more information needs to go out there. And I'm sure now that it's been passed and awaiting assent, that'll happen very quickly. Because remember, there were two concurrent things that were happening at the same time. The announcement that there is a fund that's being created at the same time. There's the start of the sale of government assets. So that money needs to go somewhere very fast. And, I think we'd said it around this table before about building a house versus, the furniture inside it. And in some sense, the furniture was already being purchased or procured before the house, was built or set up. So there's going to be quite a bit of, I see, action going forward, and also coming at a time when there's all of this political rhetoric going on in the country.
Exactly. When you talk about communication, then I'm going to repeat that this government has actually struggled with communication since the beginning, in terms of getting things out there, getting people to understand the way it's communicated, who communicates it, what's the language, what's the platform, what's the forum in which this communication is being made. So all these things need to be considered, because this is a mega project, and if it succeeds, it's good for this administration. 5 trillion si pesa kidogo, and you're putting everything, you're selling assets to put money into this fund. So it better work in terms of the people you intend it to serve need to understand why this is important to them. And I talk about the suspicion that comes about it. This is just political. This is just to, the money will go into people's pockets. This is just to benefit a few. It's not for us. Those misconceptions, you may not please everybody, but some of those misconceptions will be cleared by what you're talking about. The members of parliament need to understand, because I was listening to the sound bites that Sam was playing, and you wonder, like, wow, mulipitisha leo. Na munaelewa kweli mlikuwa mnapitisha.
But Jamila, we've been here before, where once SHA was passed, you remember? We've had
politicians came afterwards.
We've had politicians who've sat here in
and
this
they don't
very
understand
studio
what they passed.
Who say they didn't know what they were passing.
We even had something that we did. I can't remember what it was. Something to do with avocados. And there's this legislator who went to kule kwa village, and he was being asked, ni wewe mulipitisha hii kitu? And he said, like, no, I don't know what you were petitioning. So, and there's a lot of suspicion on this parliament, Yvonne, as we finish, because now we have a huge chunk There's, of course, the government ones and a huge chunk from broad-based who are in there only. So there are those who will say, ili petition na serikali too, because they had the numbers to petition it. Is it for us?
But to be fair to them, Jamila, you realize that this is not the first time. Once upon a time, there was the affordable housing bill.
Right.
I think it was at the start of 2024. It came in after the nullification by the High Court the previous year. I think it was in December late November of 2023. And the bill that came in January of 2024 versus the bill that passed a few weeks later, they were totally different. Extremely different contribution. At the time, the Attorney General, Justin Muturi, had told Parliament that the drafting was not done by his office. Indeed, he said that Parliament has the mandate to amend, to correct, to make the law look proper as law. This time round, the bill that was taken to the public participation versus the bill that has passed this afternoon are totally different. So one wonders, is it that this is the hard work of Parliament, or was it an intended anomaly? Is anomaly the good word? Yes.
Ambiguity.
Intended anomaly to pave way for what the government actually wants passed. Because the governing council introduced in this fund, it was nowhere, even in the contributions that members of Parliament are making. I don't know if members of the public proposed to have a governing council. Now it is introduced with heavy executive presence. In fact, apart from the 3 officials that I was mentioning, there will be 6 members who are not public officers that are to be appointed by the president. So the president's hand has been introduced heavily in the establishment of the council that picks the board members, that supervises the board members, that supervises the investment policy that is designed by the board, which investment policy is supposed to be taken to the House, a House where the government has a majority, and it will be approved for the board to come and implement. The governing council has been told you have no mandate to manage the day-to-day workings of the board, but don't they? So really, I think there's something here to be observed and to be perhaps looked at, that probably the bill that has passed today was actually the intended bill, or what we've been going through the past few months and weeks.
That's the motions.
It's just about motions.
Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about some movements, some serious ones, that are taking place in the Gulf region and the effect that is likely to have and is already having on Kenyans like you and I. We'll be talking about the crisis in the Gulf in just a moment. We're back here on NewsGap. Stay with us.
Ramadan is one of the holiest of times, which instills a sense of happiness, piety, and joy among all of those who have been eagerly awaiting its arrival. Many take it upon themselves to participate in religious duties and celebrations during this holy month, and an individual who shows up on the very first day and settles away by the final day and end of the month is the Masaharati. The Masaharati is the night caller that roams the streets of villages, towns, and cities. The Masaharati is one of the many revived traditions that surfaced during the holy month of Ramadan, and these individuals take upon themselves the task of notifying people that it is time to wake up for sahur. The Masaharati will walk around the areas and neighborhoods wearing traditional outfits and will use various methods to wake up people, which includes instruments such as drums, flutes, as well as religious chants.
Wacha kubahatisha, anza kuwin. Form mpya imefika. Hii form ni cheza cheza. Una bundles, una smartphone, usiwori. Dial star 770 hash sahi. Na cheza cheza huchezi hard, unacheza smart. Tuko na AI system inafanya hiyo kazi ngumu for you. Chagua quick bet, single bet ama multi bet. Weka stake yako na wache system ikupatie win yako. Games ikiingiana, wallet inanona instantly. Cheza cheza leo. Decide how much you want to win. Dial star 770 hash now. Addictive.
And days that, you know.
You only have to go into supermarkets and stores, for instance, in Dubai, to find Kenchik products. on the shelves. And all of this is because of what happened. It's now been...
It started on Saturday night.
It started on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Like we said, a lot can happen in a week.
Yep.
A lot can happen in a day. Particularly in the world that we're living in, things can change with one man's decisions every morning, and that can turn the whole world around. So, Jamila, how did we get to this point where meat exporters are saying they're looking at losses that could run into billions of shillings in just 5 days?
Just 5 days, Yvonne. And we need to remember that in that region, Gulf, ama kwa Kiswahili tunasema eneo la Ghuba, there are about 400,000... Ghuba. Ghuba.
Wow.
G-H-U-B-A.
That is Gulf.
Yeah.
Gulf.
Ghuba.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kiswahili lesson ongoing.
Yeah,
Learn every day.
Ghuba. G-H-U-B-A.
Ukisema eneo la Ghuba. I don't know, some people in this, the far right, do not remember this. But we remember when during the Kuwait War, kwa sababu Ghuba la Uajemi. So,
Ghuba la wapi?
Uajemi.
Hey,
people used to listen to radio news zamani.
So Uajemi is what? Kuwait?
Pande hizo, when there was that war, the whole Kuwait war.
Uajemi is what?
So when you're talking about that region, so we used to say Ghuba la Uajemi. I remember radio news wakati huo when we were little kids, we used to listen to the news. Again, people in the far right in this room of this table need not say anything.
Was it in the 70s or something?
No.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
The war in Kuwait was not in the 70s.
Yes.
Anyway, it's...
Anyway, so tunaita Ghuba. On Saturday, this indication about there's conflict, there's tension between Iran and Israel and the U.S. had been going on for a bit. And
talks and everything.
Talks were going on. Oman was involved in the talks. And there had been indications that there may be a breakthrough, because Iran had agreed to zero stockpiling and all sorts of conditions.
Never, ever pursue proliferation of nuclear arms. According to Oman.
According to Oman. Yeah. And all this was coming out after the fact, after now Iran was attacked by Israel and the U.S. And one of the first things that happened was the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei was killed together with several other senior leaders of Iran. And then now it opened this whole Pandora's box where Iran attacked almost 20 countries around that region. Countries that have been known to be almost safe. They are considered to be safe for foreigners. They're considered to be safe for tourists. They're considered to be a place for business, like Qatar and Bahrain and Dubai and the UAE. And suddenly these countries are facing missiles. Suddenly these countries are having to have this defense mechanisms to try and stop the missiles from falling and hurting people in those countries. We've had deaths in Qatar, we've had some deaths in UAE, we've had falling debris injuring people. I think today there were some workers from Nepal and Pakistan who were injured by shrapnel in Abu Dhabi. But then now when you go to what's happening in Iran now, I think by the last count today, over 1,000 people had been killed by the strikes that are not just happening in Tehran, but I think in almost 20 other cities in Iran. And the question many are asking is, if this is supposed to be an attack against the government of Iran and military installations, then why are we seeing hospitals and schools? Because one of the first attacks was at a school, a girls' school. About 170 girls, students were killed and were buried yesterday. I was listening to the news today and they're saying 20 education sectors have been hit in the past 6 days. 11 hospitals have been hit. Pharmaceutical centers have been hit. Even offices for the Red Crescent have been hit. Iranians are being forced to move from Tehran to other parts. Israel has issued warning to them to move. Right around the corner is Lebanon, where Hezbollah are fighting with Iran, and Israel is hitting them too. So there's this whole thing about how this region is now turning into vita vya watu watatu, vime include almost 20 other countries. And one thing the Gulf states do not want to see is this state of affairs where people are actually scared and worried that they have to leave. Again, I talked about how countries like Qatar and Bahrain and the UAE have created this whole image that this is a safe place. You can all come here. The number of expatriates, I was reading that about nationals from over 200 countries live in those places, who work there, who are students, who go to school there, who do business there, who go there as tourists. And now what they're seeing is countries sending in repatriation flights to bring their people back home. Like Kenya Airways did, the flight left yesterday and it came back today with about 150 Kenyans. We saw the story of the students who had gone gone there on a trip and they're back home and the relief on their faces. I was reading about Uganda has done the same. They have evacuated students from Iran to Kampala through Turkey. Sierra Leone has done the same, has removed their students from Iran back home. Kenya has evacuated its nationals. The UK is doing the same. Other countries in the that have people in the region or they have residents in the region are doing the same thing. So this exodus of people, not out of kutaka kutoka, but because of fear for their lives, I don't think it's something that those countries in the Gulf expected to see. Now look at the effects for Kenya. We're talking about how about 400,000 Kenyans live there, and we listened to the story about how nyama, namajani chai, and all those things that they export there. In 5-6 days, this gentleman was talking about 1 billion shillings. So if this war continues for long, what does that mean? And remember, there are also a lot of Kenyans who said remittances from those countries, from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, from Qatar. We have a huge number of Kenyans who live in Doha, for instance, who live and work there, in Dubai, in the UAE, students who go to school there, Kenyan students. So what does that mean in the long run? Because all indications are, at least when we listen to the US administration, this could go on for 5 weeks or more, and they're willing for you to go on until an end that they want is reached. So Yvonne, I don't think anyone thought that when that first missile was sent into Iran, it would now turn out into what we are seeing now. The whole Gulf region is now being drawn into this war. And now other countries like Britain and France and Italy and the Netherlands are having to send ships to Cyprus to try and protect their interest in that area. So it's opened a whole kind of worms that is becoming a bit difficult now to close.
Yeah, and all of those are, affecting us here. I mean, among other things, the much talked about, for instance, government-to-government deal, where we're getting our fuel solely from, these two countries, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Your thoughts, Jay, on, the bigger economic crisis for Kenya, for a war that is taking place thousands of miles away, but that has real implications for us if this persists. U.S. President Donald Trump saying maybe another 5 to 8 weeks for now, but that could then mean something. When you take your matatu in the morning, it could have an implication on what your fare would be like. It could have an implication on the cost of your food, for instance. Jay?
Indeed, Yvonne, the basics. The cost of crude has actually gone up by about 15% in the last 6 days, heading now to almost $100 per barrel.
Yeah.
And that automatically translates to the cost of petroleum products locally. We are a net importer as a country. Nearly 80% of whatever commodities we use in this country we import. And most of them are shipped through the Gulf. And with ships now not able to pass through, what that means is that cargo is being held, the cost of insurance is going up, and somebody will ultimately bear that cost, and that is you and me. The central bank has, over the last few months, been lowering the cost of borrowing. And that has been as a result of what they're calling the lowering of inflation. We are likely to see these affect inflations locally. And if that happens, then definitely they will have to do something to try and manage. And that would likely mean that the cost of borrowing will go up. Remember, all this is happening when we are still recovering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are still not yet out of the woods. And some of these policies and measures that were being taken by the central bank were basically to help revive the economy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Kenya, just like many African economies, do not have the shock absorbers to withstand such kind of global effects for a long time. And because even at the global stage, we still don't know the why of this war and who owns it, makes it even difficult.
And what their intention or outcome
the intentions,
is.
yes.
Yeah.
And that is why it is important when you say that these are the dangers of the world operating on the whims of an individual. That you wake up and you don't like my face, and you say, I have to go. Maybe somebody might look at it that they thought it would be an in and out.
Yeah.
But look at what now Iran is doing, their strategy.
Yeah.
is to attack these Gulf nations and attack their infrastructure and ports. And those are very critical to the global economy.
Right.
So where they thought probably they'd distract Iran, Iran is retaliating by ensuring that their allies in that region and the critical infrastructure that they use to support the rest of the world are being affected. And that would translate to the cost of living locally.
And the Straits of Hormuz also.
Oh, yes. I was just watching some time-lapse video by the BBC earlier on. And you see how from Sunday the ships have slowed down until today there's none. So how many ships are stuck with cargo?
Yeah, and this is when, you know, geography and shipping and all of these things come in.
They have to go through
It's that
Cape
Strait
of
of
Good Hope.
Hormuz.
Yeah.
It's a 33-kilometer gap. And Iran has been known, as it has done now, to cause a blockade.
On it.
And for understanding, this is the only exit route for the oil-producing nations of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Iraq, Kuwait, and Iran. Now, how this affects Kenya? So first of all, globally, about 20 to 30% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And for Kenya, this is even more interesting. Because that G2G deal means our oil supply or our fuel supply relies largely on the Gulf states of Saudi Arabia because we signed the deal with Aramco, one of whose refineries has been temporarily shut down as a precautionary measure. Then there's the United Arab Emirates through ADNOC and the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. So this is where our oil comes from. Now, when they're temporarily shutting down, you know what that means in terms of, you know, the oil that comes this way. Now, how does this affect us? Fine. You know, the Energy Petroleum Regulatory Authority and the Cabinet Secretary in Energy have assured us of steady supply. But for now, how long we can keep that for the long term, because nobody can predict how long this will go, will be the challenge. And this is how. There's the landed cost of the fuel, because just shipping it, like you've said, first of all, the ships aren't moving, and if they are, the insurance is much higher. So the landed cost of that could go up. Now, for everyone, the landed cost is the price of the product when it lands here. And of course, we have our 16% VAT and everything else that adds on to that. That higher fuel, for the matatu business and the transport business, which, by the way, operate on very thin margins, for them, they can't absorb that higher cost. They will obviously pass it on to the rest of us. But there's also something else I think that we haven't, perhaps sort of, and I think will start to come into play in a moment. And maybe what we can start to do is get ready with 3-5 to listen to the director of IATA 3-5 when we talk about our tea exports. By the way, Iran is the single largest importer of Kenya's tea. The total exports to Iran, by the way, were $50.8 million in 2024. In that year, we exported 13 million kilos of tea to Iran, which was valued at 4.26 billion shillings. And that's not all. There's coffee, there's tea, there's spices. 90% of our exports to Tehran are made of this. And it's not just Tehran, it's also Pakistan. And remember, all of these countries are in that region. So this is where we are. Like you were saying, the United Arab Emirates has fashioned itself as a hub for investment. And it's an important re-export hub because many people take their goods there for onward, particularly to the Asian market. So what does that mean for the businesses there? Even when you were to think about if we can import more than we usually do in terms of fuel, do we have enough storage perhaps to take on more than we usually would in a typical...
Because ideally we are supposed to have a 90-day stock.
Right.
We never have. Yes.
See, so maybe even some of the lessons to be drawn from this, for me, might be to think about diversifying our fuel sources. Now, I know we're stuck with the G2G deal until 2027, because that's when it was extended to. But, it's crises like these that now start to give you food for thought about, some of the ways in which our country is structured. And to be quite honest, we're largely dependent on the decision by two gentlemen in the world today as to how this goes.
And Yvonne, the alternative, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. You have to go all the way to Cape of Good Hope, Ukochini, South Africa. That takes about 15 days or more, almost 3 weeks more than it would have taken for that.
Yeah, or maybe to bring it home for those who are on, is it pronounced Sheen? Where you bring all the fancy stuff and the clothes.
Sheen.
The ones who are laughing know what I'm talking about. If fuel and G2G is too big for you, just know if you like that chain,
it will be
nguo zako zitachelewa kidogo, and they will be more expensive. Sam has no clue what we're talking about.
No, I was actually waiting for you to call a certain clip that Robert
Yes, let's listen to it actually now with the tea.
So let's call it.
Okay, let's listen to let's listen to George Ouna, who's the director of IATA, on what this will mean for the tea market.
If this conflict continues, we are going to lose over 20% of our export market share. So with that conflict going on, it means from next week, the auction will be very inactive. There will be little participation in the auction.
It's also about the clearing agencies. This is how the world is globally connected today. Let's listen to Dennis Morai, who's the director of Konza Clearing Agency.
Kwa sasa hivi zile ndege ambazo tunaweza pata, utaangalia utapata kwamba hata the freight cost itself wata double ama wa triple sababu ya the situation. In such a situation, transit sheds.
All right. I'd like us to listen to Nicholas Ngaho, whom we heard from earlier, about, somebody was saying, well, if all of this meat and all these meat products aren't going there, well, they can be consumed locally. But just listen to the amounts of meat that we're exporting and that are currently, being held.
For UAE, carrying 60 tons of meat, and it's the only meat that we have been able to see so far since last week, Friday. So it's a big deal for the government, and we are requesting them to look for intervention measures.
And so that was him speaking to us yesterday. 60 tons of meat. And if you remember in that story that was done by Emmanuel Tour, they were showing us their cold storage.
Yeah.
And it was rows and rows and aisles upon aisles of chicken.
I know it's Ramadan, so they are consuming a bit more.
They consume definitely a bit more.
Yeah.
But you can tell, I'm not sure the local market is able to absorb this, and say this is something that we're going to be able to do. So it's an interesting time we're living in, and that's why I think many of us are now paying attention to big words like drones and missiles and domes and things like that, because suddenly now those big names and big words in the Straits of Hormuz and others are now a very close reality for us here.
Yeah, and now I understand that missiles are of different ranges. Now, the interesting bit is that the government of Kenya has been rather quiet, especially in preparing the people without really causing panic, because you must have seen the speculation that is going on about what may happen to the fuel prices, like what you were saying. But I saw the statement from Opio and the Cabinet Secretary for Energy, saying that we have enough stocks. But I hope beyond those statements, there are actually things that we are doing to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a situation that would really disadvantage the economy in a great deal. I also take note of what has been going on. You do realize the United Nations Security Council has not yet given a joint statement on what they think this is. There is no condemnation, there is no proper guidance on what exactly should be happening. But of course, we've heard from different leaders, including the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, saying, I just want to quote what he said here, that he warned that the military action that has embroiled countries across the Middle East carries the risk of igniting a chain of events that no one can control in the most volatile region of the world. Of course, he had been calling for people to return to the negotiating table, that they should still give diplomacy an opportunity. At this point in time, if you had to look at how global leaders are expressing themselves, especially the Prime Minister of Israel, at the same time the President of the US, you are concerned if this is what returning to the negotiating table entails. At the same time, you will see that across the world, leaders have been very cautious on what to say. And you can just see the struggle, because, yes, it's being said that the US is aligning with Israel, but there are several nations that are aligned with the US. I think Kenya is one of them, largely. But also, what then happens when such a situation is evolving? You've seen Western leaders, like including the Prime Minister of the UK, he has said that he cannot cooperate or work with the US on this particular approach, and he has not attracted the best of words from the US president.
No, Winston Churchill.
Oh yes. So at the same time, you recall that recently we heard from President William Ruto, who said that Kenya strongly condemns the strikes on the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Oman, Kuwait, Jordan, and Bahrain in the evolving conflict in the Middle East. It is evident that the regionalization of this conflict poses a grave threat to international peace and security. At this defining and perilous moment in global history, long-standing multilateral institutions remain indispensable frameworks for the resolution of the current crisis in the Middle East. He continued to say that Kenya calls for urgent multi-stakeholder engagement towards de-escalation. So you see clearly what Kenya is condemning. It is the reaction after Iran was attacked. And you probably will understand that the president has access to more material, more information. He has the responsibility to make more strategic approaches and statements when it comes to this conflict.
But perhaps that's a strategy. Didn't we see the Cabinet Secretary for Interior having a meeting with
Israel,
with the Israeli ambassador shortly after that statement was put out.
Right. So really, it's a delicate situation, I believe, for everyone. That's why you find all presidents or prime ministers are being very cautious in how they approach it. But the reality is here. I don't know how we are meant to deal with it, but I think it's also a good thing that we've seen some of the Kenyans who were stuck in the UAE have at least come back, and we hope that more can be done to at least safeguard the lives and safety of all these Kenyans out there. So really, I think it's a question of having to wait and see, but at least you've seen the place of the US and the place of a leader who comes in with all manner of approaches, especially when Donald Trump was elected, whether it's in the first term or this second term. He's been very vocal on what he wants to do. He's no pushover, and you can see what even temperament of a leader can do to.
Right, and he had a few choice words for the leader of Spain, and saying, bad leader, I love the people, but I don't like them. But, it's interesting what you're talking about, where the world is right now, considering the temperament of the leaders in the world at the moment, and how everybody takes a step back and, which is generally the case. But I think, from all the years of reporting, more so now. I don't know if you saw this, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, on Saturday, after seeing that, said, we will release a statement on Monday, because they needed to step back and go and consult further within the EU, and this is just where we are. It's I guess the sort of type of leadership we have now, where people are speaking more from the hip, and others taking.
You can just imagine a meeting of the UN Security Council.
Yeah.
What conversation are they having? Because, US is one of the permanent five. You have Russia there, you have China there. And, of course, China and Russia are not agreeing with what the US is doing.
Right, yeah.
So you can imagine the sort of conversation they're having. And it can be explained that a week later, because it will be a week on Saturday, we still don't have a position arrived at by the UN Security Council. So very difficult moments for the entire world.
And we still have the US not really explaining why they went to war in the first place. And that's one of the things that this administration is facing in the US. Because the reasons that were given originally have changed quite a bit. In fact, I remember the first day, one of the things that Trump said, President Trump, was like, Iranians, this is your time, to take over your country, because come on, you've killed the supreme leader. This is
and it's not regime change.
It's not regime change. Then when you listen to him speak a couple of days later, and his Secretary of Defense or Department of War speak, the whole thing about Iranians, this is your chance, has not been mentioned again. So they're giving different reasons about why they had to go to war. So this justification also for them is becoming an issue, because they need to try and show the American people that they're not doing this because of Israel. but it's because they are threats to Americans. And they're giving reasons about how the Iran-America conflict between them has gone on for 40-something years. They are trying to justify why this had to happen. But as you said, Yvonne, the longer this goes on, the longer it affects not just the three countries, which is Iran, Israel, and the US, but all the Gulf states around it, and a lot of countries around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said, the COVID pandemic and everything else, and here's something else we have to deal with. So let's...
Ukraine.
Sorry?
Oh, Ukraine. Did you say Ukraine?
Yes, and grain and everything that is coming from there. So interesting times to be alive. We'll watch and see, and just hope that the government of Kenya at least is doing everything it can, not just to safeguard the over 400,000 people who are in the Gulf region, but also the Kenyans who are here, businesses, the economy, and individuals. Jamila,
tunafunga kazi. The most peaceful person on this table, aanze leo.
That's precious.
Ana vita na kina mtu yoyote.
Rudia kwa wale walioko nyuma.
Wasikie, the most peaceful person on this table.
Asante.
Bonyo.
Thank you. Tonight, I pick a bone with Kenya's political class. I will not call them the elites, because their conduct as we head towards the polls does not deserve that title. Every single week, we are treated to scenes of political violence and intolerance across the country. Young men and women are kept on standby, not for employment, not for innovation, but for deployment. Deployment into chaos, intimidation, and violence. On this platform, I have previously called out the Ministry of Interior and the National Police Service for what appears to be inaction. Tonight, I want to shift the spotlight. This responsibility rests squarely at the doorstep of the political class. All of them, elected leaders, aspiring leaders, and those in office. But let's deal with the facts here. Unemployment in Kenya remains a serious challenge. According to the International Labour Organization, their 2024 estimates indicate that Kenya's unemployment rate stands at about 5.4%. That figure represents thousands of able-bodied young men and women actively searching for work and finding none. In urban areas, unemployment is estimated to hover around 15%, while in rural Kenya, it ranges between 4 and 5%. Behind these percentages are real people, frustrated, idle, and vulnerable to exploitation. And now, here's the real issue. This pool of unemployed youths is being weaponized as the 2027 general election fever gathers momentum. While this is not new, the scale, the coordination, and the brazenness are. There is now a structured market for political violence. There are official rates set for heckling, disruption, and for physical confrontation. The uglier it is at a rally, the costlier it earns in towns and villages. This is no longer a ticking time bomb. It has detonated, and someone within the political class appears to be thriving in this smoke. More disturbing is the sophistication behind it. These mercenaries of democracy are carefully disguised as they accompany elected officials to political events. Their role is introduced as security or bouncers. But if you scratch beneath the surface, many are drawing salaries funded by you, the taxpayer. Some operate under titles like county enforcement officers, casuals within the National Government Constituency Development Fund operations. They sit on official payrolls and are well accounted for. Others are absorbed into youth groups benefiting from the national and county government-funded programs or donor-funded initiatives such as financing locally led climate action, popular as FLOCA. During the week, these young men and women pose as environmental workers, clearing drains, planting trees, sweeping markets, you name it. But as the week eases to the weekend, their tool of trade changes. The rakes, the slashes, the spades, and the brooms disappear. Out comes the rungus, the pangas, and all manner of crude weapons. The perfect setting to breed and sell fear. The tactics is simple. Mask the money trail, finance them indirectly, and create plausible deniability. Political competition in this country should never mutate into organized intimidation. Campaigns are meant to be marketplace of ideas, not battlegrounds engineered by thin-skinned operatives who cannot win arguments without force. We must call these out collectively and unapologetically. Those orchestrating this violence are not strangers. They're amongst us and are custodians of our public funds. We must demand accountability and insist on political fair play. We, the citizens, have a right to assemble, debate, and choose free from fear. Elective leadership cannot be built on intimidation, just like democracy cannot survive on hired violence. Let the people decide, not goons, fear, or coercion. That is my bond tonight.
On Wednesday, the government announced an oversubscription of the Kenya Pipeline Company shares following the much publicized IPO. But as they say, the devil is in the details. First, the privatization of the Kenyan pipeline has been a topic that dominated public discourse for the better part of the year 2025. Many questions were posed, many loaded in suspicion that particular government functionaries were intent at cutting a piece of the KPC cake. But then the government took the sale through the required process, getting Parliament's nod in October 2025. By December, a transaction advisor had been found and the sale commenced on the 19th of January. For over a month, there were public messages put out. Private messages too were sent out to CDSC account holders, commercial banks to their customers, all in a bid to have Kenyans own a piece of the Kenya pipeline. And when time was running out, a 3-day extension was secured. Let's look at the outcome. Out of an allocation of 20%, equivalent to 2.3 billion shares reserved for Kenyan individuals, only 464 million shares bids were received. This translates to 3.9% of total shares on offer. 70,000 Kenyans, we are told, are reported to have sent in their bids, an average of 6,640 shares per person. In monetary terms, individual investors invested 59,000 shillings on average. The performance was worse for foreign investors. Out of an allocation of 20% of the sale, foreign bids accounted for 0.03% only. And the Cabinet Secretary now blames Kenyans for the negative review and comments of the KPC IPO.
The interest from foreign investors went down because Kenyans are too much about discrediting their processes, even the ones they don't understand. In Kenya, everybody's a valuer. Everybody's a lawyer. We are all legal experts. We are all accountants. We want to analyze P&L and balance sheet, and we are saying how balance sheet is inaccurate, and you never went beyond class 8. You never did any accounting.
Well, we can argue on whether academic achievement grants a Kenyan more power over the other in holding an opinion. But that would not be necessary. What is certain is that the government had an elaborate machinery to market the KPC IPO, replete with millions of shillings worth of advertising across most platforms you can think of. All that complemented by an excited political class that dominates the two houses of parliament. They spent much of their time on microphones, hailing what a brilliant sale KPC IPO was, and how it was going to revolutionize the country's infrastructure once the National Infrastructure Fund is in place to receive the proceeds of the privatization. At the end of it all, only 4 billion shilling worth of investment was put in by Kenyans. Why? And what are Kenyans telling the government? Is it that they don't have money? Maybe not. And this is why. Towards the end of 2025, Safaricom Limited issued a green bond worth 15 billion shillings. it attracted a 276% subscription, translating to 41 billion shillings. Almost all the bids, at 96%, were from retail investors, meaning individuals who put in over 39 billion shillings at a minimum of 50,000 shillings per investor. That was just about 6 weeks before the KPC IPO opened. And now retail investors have put in 4 billion shillings only into KPC, a paltry 10% of what they did to the Safaricom bond. That should tell us something about investor confidence, that Kenyans are willing to bet with their wallets for what is clear, promising and devoid of politics. It's been 18 years since an extremely successful IPO of Safaricom, when the government of Kenya was selling off 10 billion shares, yielding a 532% of a subscription. Now, Kenya is a much expanded economy. More people have money and are more aware of how to invest their money. They are more educated anyway. And so when Kenyans choose not to invest into what is government's, it cannot be because they didn't study beyond the first 8 years of 844. It must be a deeper conversation that any discerning government should pick. It is about people's money, their wealth, and they will put it where they believe there is intention to grow an economy, not careers of proponents. That's my sense tonight.
This week we were reminded in the most painful way just how fragile life truly is. 6 lives lost in a tragic helicopter crash. 6 families forever changed. Among those who passed away was a member of parliament, a man described by many as someone who fought for his people, someone who will be deeply missed by his family, his friends, and his constituents. He was a politician, an elected leader from the ruling party. But in death, titles fade. What remains is the human being, a father, a colleague, a friend, a son, a husband. What shocked me, however, was what happened after the tragedy. Barely 24 hours later, our political leaders were back at it, on church podiums, standing on top of vehicles, addressing crowds, talking politics, making promises. If elected in 2027, I'll do this and that, as if nothing had happened. And I couldn't help but think, death is so final, so very final. In Islam, we are reminded, kullu nafsun da'iqatul maut, meaning every soul shall taste death. It is the one certainty we all share. The only mystery is when. So what would have gone so terribly wrong if just for a moment our leaders had paused? Paused to remember, to mourn, to pray, or to simply be present for grieving families and a grieving nation. Because sometimes politicians easily fall into the trap of appearing heartless or pretentious. During the funeral, you might not even recognize them as the same people who are politicking so soon after such a tragedy. Suddenly the tone changes, the speeches become solemn, and mourning itself becomes a spectacle. What would have been lost if church services had remained about prayer and not politics? If rallies had been postponed, political meetings cancelled for the moment? If leaders had chosen compassion, chosen utu? Because moments like these reveal something deeper. They show us whether leadership is about service or simply about self. A colleague has died unexpectedly, someone you knew, someone you met, someone you worked with. The least you can do is respect them, even in death. Right now, families are mourning. A father grieving a son who had begun carrying family responsibility, a wife mourning her spouse, children and siblings preparing to bury someone they loved. The least we can expect from those who lead us is a pause, a simple human pause, out of respect, compassion, and basic human decency. And perhaps that is the reminder this week, the reminder that this week leaves us with, that beyond titles, politics and the noise, what matters most is how we treat each other in moments of loss. To be human, to show compassion, to have utu. That is my memo.
Public participation is not an inconvenience in Kenya's governance framework. It's not a bureaucratic box to tick. It is a constitutional principle. Yet, increasingly, one gets the uneasy sense that those who wield power see it differently, as an obstacle to navigate, or worse, an irritation to endure. Consider the recent cooperation agreement between the national government and the Nairobi County government, a significant arrangement affecting millions of residents of the capital city. It was signed with great fanfare at State House, of all places. Only afterwards did we hear that public participation would follow. But logically, should it not be the other way around? Public participation is meant to inform decisions, not ratify them after the fact. Because if the residents of Nairobi, the people whose lives will be affected by such an agreement, were to say they do not support it, what then? Does the government unwind a deal already signed? Kenya's courts have confronted this issue many times, and their message has been unmistakable. In 2024, the High Court declared the Privatization Act 2023 unconstitutional, halting plans to privatize several state assets. The court at the time found that the law failed the test of meaningful public participation, both in its quality and its reach. In another decision, the courts made it even clearer. Public participation, they said, must be, and I quote, real and not illusory. Not a cosmetic or public relations act. Not cosmetic, not public relations, not a formality. But perhaps the deeper issue here is not necessarily procedural, perhaps it is philosophical. Because beyond the legal requirement lies a troubling pattern in the way questions from citizens are treated. Recently, during a television talk show, a host questioned the government's development record against its campaign promises. Instead of addressing the substance of the question, the response was dismissive. The host, viewers were told, simply did not know how to read the manifesto. Officials said they would teach him how to read manifestos. Yet, during that same discussion, it became clear that the specific issue being debated was not specifically mentioned in the manifesto itself. That they were doing was not clarification. It was condescending. Then there is a recent Kenya pipeline company IPO, which struggled to attract some investors. Retail investors stayed away. Foreign investors stayed away too. But the explanation offered was curious. Foreign investors, we were told, had been frightened off by Kenyans questioning the deal. Apparently, these foreign investors were not concerned with the valuation or the books or the fundamentals that investors normally examine. The problem, we were told, was that Kenyans talk too much. The minister went further, lamenting what he described as a country full of armchair experts who question everything, even primary school dropouts. It's a remarkable way for a government to speak about its own citizens. And this tone is not entirely new. Even senior advisors have sometimes responded to criticism with open disdain. On social media, one former presidential economic advisor once dismissed critics bluntly. He said, "If you're ignorant, keep quiet and learn." That posture, that assumption that those in power understand and the public does not, sits uneasily with the spirit of Kenya's constitution. Public participation is embedded not merely as a process, but as a principle. Article 10 lists participation of the people among the national values and principles of governance, binding on all state organs and public officers whenever they make or implement public policy decisions. You see, the Constitution recognizes a simple truth. Government power is not self-justifying. It must be exercised with the consent and involvement of the people. Public participation exists precisely to prevent governance from collapsing into a small circle of decision makers who believe they know better than everybody else. It redistributes power outward, away from boardrooms and cabinet tables, back to the citizens whose lives are shaped by those very decisions. Now, it's not always neat, and it's not always comfortable, but democracy rarely is. And if those in power find the Constitution an inconvenient guide, perhaps they might turn to something they like to invoke far more often: spiritual wisdom. The Desiderata offers a simple reminder. Listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. Because in a democracy, the people are not an obstacle to governance. They are the reason for it. That's my take tonight. All right.
So a bit of feedback coming in.
Yeah.
Jamila, a lot of it's about what you said. Uajemi na Guba.
Guba la Uajemi.
Sasa hiyo ni maneno. Someone is saying that Guba la Uajemi is the Persian Gulf. Also Vita via Guba is Gulf War. So I don't know which war you started. Because there's got a bit of it.
However, that is anaelewa Kiswahili.
Yeah,